As we moved into the 70s, of course, then we 72 was the enactment of the Title IX, and that was a major factor in college athletics. And it didn't go really very smoothly. They didn't think ahead very much on it. And the typical government edict. They didn't look and see what was going to happen when they made this statement. And I don't think anybody argued with the concept of Title IX. But boy, there was a lot of hard feelings, and people said some things that really they didn't really mean, or were taken out of context. And the feeling at that time, women got I'm fishing for a word. Well, the women said, okay, finally we got equal rights here with the men, and we're going to do this, and we can do this. And so for a number of years, they insisted on having female coaches. Well, that meant you had to have a whole nother coaching staff. A lot of schools couldn't afford that. And so what happened then is to meet those guidelines, they were dropping men's sports to afford women's sports, and ultimately limiting the women in their opportunity. So instead of having a full complement of sport, you reduced both sides. You reduced both the men's and the women's opportunities for athletes on the collegiate level. And that went on for, well, it's still going on today, actually. In fact, there are some schools that are dropping or have dropped a lot of the non-revenue sports simply to meet the requirements of the law. Now, I don't think anybody, no matter who they were, I don't think anybody ever argued with the intent of Title IX. I think everybody recognized the fact that everybody should have an equal opportunity to compete. The other side of the coin, I don't think anybody really thought out what the ramifications of adding that many sports opportunities in terms of facilities, what kind of an effect would it have on your facilities, what kind of an effect would it have on your staff, coaching staffs, and they here, as far as track is concerned, that was right at the very beginning of my head coaching. In fact, maybe a little bit before. They when they put the Title IX thing in, and they decided to have a full complement of women's athletics here, they said, well, we're going to have female coaches for the female athletes. We're not going to have male coaches for the female athletes. And that lasted maybe 4 or 5 years. We didn't practice at the same times. We didn't practice at the track at the same time. We didn't go to the same meets. We went to different meets, and it was strictly 2 separate programs. as far as track and field was concerned, and basketball the same way. They would practice. We only had, they practiced at Butler for a while, and then they said, no, we can't. That's not an equal facility to Fuhrer, and so then they started alternating dates and times of practice. But and ultimately, things worked themselves out. But it was a kind of a testy time for a little bit, particularly in the early, I would say the early 70s. It was and then that was a major change for us here. We got the field house, 1969. That was a big deal for us. When we got that, that was probably as big a boost to our success athletically as anything. It was allowed us to do so many things that we couldn't do previously, and that was we never ever believed we could get that. And then, in fact, we'd always laugh about it. Yeah, we're going to have this great big. And one Sunday morning, I get a telephone call. I'm just getting ready to go to church, and I get a telephone call from Papick, and he said, "Hey," he said, "we got the go-ahead on the field house." And I said, "You're kidding me?" And he said, "No." He said, I just got a call from David Osterhout, who's our business manager. He said they finally got the funding straightened around, and we can get it started, and they want to meet with the architects on Monday. He said, "I want you to sit down and draw out what you think would be the best possible field house for us, configuration for our field house." He said, "I'm going to call Erickson and tell him to do the same thing, and I want to meet with you guys at my house 7 o'clock at night." And so we each sat down and drew out what we thought was the epitome of field houses. And we had seen a few. We had our big meet indoors in track and field had been for a number of years, had been the K-State Invitational. K-State had a really nice Ahern field house. It was a really nice 200-meter dirt track. And the coach there, of course, was Ward Haylett, who was one of our graduates and had coached here at Doane before he went to K-State. And so that was a big meet for us. That was our national indoor meet, really, until the NAIA got theirs started. But we would go down there. So we were familiar with that. We had we'd been over to Graceland College. We had played them in football earlier, and we had seen their field house. So we had been around and seen one or two indoor facilities, enough to know what was good and what was not so hot. So each of us sat down, drew out what we thought was what we wanted, and we met that night at Papick's place and tried to put all the pieces together, and did, and met with the architects the next morning, and that was essentially what we wound up with in terms of the original Fuhrer field house. One of the things that that happened in that meeting with the architects, they had some ideas about making the outside of the building look particularly unique and different, and spending a lot of money on the outside, and Mr. Papik wouldn't stand for that. And he wanted to have the one thing he wanted to have was a polyurethane floor. So, and so the one we had seen was a tartan floor, and that was the big polyurethane at that point in time. That was one of the original ones. And so they argued back and forth, and Papik said, the guy, the one architect said, well, if we don't do this, and we put all this money on the inside of it, the place will look like a barn. And Al hit the table, and papers jumped. And he said, I don't care what it looks like on the outside. We're going to be working on the inside, and that's where we ought to be spending the money. That's where the students are going to be getting any kind of a value out of this building. And he won the point. We wound up with a tartan floor, and that lasted for, gosh, I don't know, close to 30 years. And before we got the Mondo on top of it. And so that time frame, that late 60s time frame, was a time of change on our campus. It was a change athletic facility-wise, and it was a change in our student body, makeup of the student body. It was an exciting time to be at Doane, and it was, and I'm sure it was on every campus. We were not unique in that respect. But the late 60s was a time of change. We were starting to move from also ran just another run-of-the-mill athletic program to a nationally recognized powerhouse type program that was pretty good in just about every sport that we put on the court or on the track or on the field. And we were starting to get, and the same thing is true, I think, at that time of the NAIA. It was, that was kind of the heyday of the NAIA. It was, the NAIA at that time was the very first national tournament, basketball tournament, to have any black players in it, and actually had, I don't know, probably 2 or 3, 4 all black teams, because Jackson State, Prairie View, they were Texas Southern, North Carolina Central, they were all in the NAIA at that point in time. And so these were all, I think, changes that maybe a guy didn't recognize how important they were when they were happening. And you just worked through them and accommodated the change. And if change is good, then this was a really good period of time. Trying to think what, have to rely on my notes. I think that, you know, and we finally were getting athletes that were able to compete at a national level, where previously most of our kids, the bulk of our kids, were primarily talent-wise at a local level of competition. And we're starting to get at this, in this time frame, We're starting to get guys who were able to compete at a national level. And it's the first time we really ever thought of national opportunity for our kids. And you know, the NAIA was just in its formative years at this point. I think the first, well, I know that I ran in the second track meet, national track meet the NAIA had, and that was 1953. Their very first meet was 1952. So this is an organization that's only 10 years old. And now they had basketball before that. It was called the NAIAB at that time. And in fact, that's what it started out. It started as a basketball opportunity, a national organization for small college basketball, and then branched out slowly into other sports as the opportunities became necessary. And so we were, those of us who were here or in collegiate athletics at that time were really in a kind of on the ground floor of the national organization, and the realignment of conferences was starting about that time, and we were part of that. It was kind of an exciting time, yeah, and we were going to make the move now. As we start into the 70s, then we started making the move into the women's, the addition of women's athletics in the whole program, and that was it was not a smooth road. Let me put it that way. It was a bumpy road, and we could see it coming in the late 60s. Early 70s, you could see that this was going to be a factor. It just didn't come out of the blue in 1972 when the Congress enacted Title IX. That was not just a lightning bolt type thing. We had a number of years where prior to that we knew some kind of change was going to come up. I mean, there was enough rumblings that everybody knew that something had to happen. What it was going to do, and it took a federal law to do it. And people were, and I don't say this with any kind of pride at all, but men were not very. The men in athletics were not very conducive to helping women have the opportunity to compete. The men in athletics were pretty conservative as a group, and resisted change, and resisted the inclusion of females into the athletic opportunity for a long time, at least 3 or 4 or 5 years. Before the Title IX thing came down, and I think that the Title IX in 1972. What is that? 50 years now. 40 years now. Seems like yesterday, but it was before that. It was an answer to the reluctance of males to create opportunities for female athletes, and now Title IX is all-inclusive opportunity for females, but the big thing was athletics, and that's what they were trying to get at. And it was a time frame that, and you heard all kinds of stuff, how the world was going to come to a screeching halt if this happened, if we let girls play softball, on the collegiate level, it was going to ruin the both the college and the female, and it was. There were all kinds of strange arguments about what the effects of including females into the athletic programs. Well, even at the Olympic level, the furthest that they would let a female run up until that time in the Olympic Games was 800 meters, and they limited the number of events that women could compete in. It was a strange. You heard some really strange arguments both ways, and so it was a period of time of great upheaval in athletics, both from the standpoint of the inclusion of minorities in the athletic opportunity, now the inclusion of females in the athletic opportunity, and the disparity between bigs and the not so bigs, and the transition of people moving back and forth, the colleges moving back and forth, starting to move in the direction of the change of conferences, adding schools to conferences, other schools dropping out, moving to a different conference. This all put together made for a period of time of real uncertainty in collegiate athletics, and I don't think we appreciated it nearly as much as we should have at that point in time. I think we were so busy trying to win meets or games or whatever, or conference championships or whatever it was, that we just really didn't appreciate what was going on around us until it was fact. And then it was too late. And it was just, man, we were just scrambling to keep up and patch up. And unfortunately, what wound up, as it all wound up, it was a reactive kind of setting. People weren't proactive and tried to figure out what would be the ramifications of all of these changes. And we were always reacting to something that happened. And that's not the best way to operate if you can avoid it, because you don't have an opportunity to really think things through, and you're always trying to scramble to put out a brush fire. And that's what the late 60s and 70s was all about, people putting out brush fires and trying to accommodate change after the change has happened. And it was exciting.